Good afternoon from New York. I'm Adam Lupel, IPI Vice President, and it is my honor to welcome you to today's discussion, UN75, the future we want, the UN we need, which is the third event in a series of virtual dialogues organized by the Office of the Special Advisor on the UN's 75th anniversary, the Group of Women Leaders, Voices for Change and Inclusion, and the Center for Global Affairs at NYU. We are really pleased to be co-hosting today's online conversation in partnership with them all. This event is in part a looking back to look ahead. As we celebrate 75 years of United Nations history, and I might add 50 years of IPI, we, the peoples, in the most inclusive sense possible, must look forward to craft together the future we want and indeed the UN that we need. Today's event, as you all no doubt know, takes place at the start of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And I think we all expected this particular General Assembly to be an extraordinary one. Preparations for the UN's 75th anniversary has been going on for years. But we maybe did not expect that perhaps the most extraordinary thing would be that it is the first to be conducted virtually. The 2020 outbreak of COVID-19 has truly laid bare the vulnerability of the international system to pandemic disease as a cross-cutting threat to the international order. From the global economy to the maintenance of international peace and security, the pandemic is having an impact far beyond matters of global public health. And we can all admit that international cooperation around a coordinated response to the virus has been insufficient at best. The pandemic has both underscored how interconnected we all are and made clear how much work we need to do to transcend the divisions that hamper our ability to respond effectively to a whole host of global issues. COVID-19 has revealed that strengthening international cooperation and rebuilding trust has never been more urgent and more necessary. And this is indeed the United Nations that we need. This discussion brings together an extraordinary group of women leaders from around the world to discuss priorities and solutions for recovering better from the global pandemic and for building a safer, fairer, more sustainable world. It forms part of the UN75 global conversation, which began in January, and recommendations made during today's discussion will feed into the final UN75 report due out in January of 2021 next year. But I'm going to leave it to others to tell you more about that. And so it is my pleasure to turn now to a longtime friend, colleague, interlocutor, W. Paul Sidhu, professor and head of the UN initiative at the Center for Global Affairs at New York University, NYU, as well as a proud alumnus of IPI going back many years. Sidhu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for those very warm words of welcome, Adam, and we're so delighted that IPI is hosting this event and all the support that you've provided. I'm really delighted for three reasons to be here. First, I'm delighted to be back at IPI, even if it's virtually. This is where I actually began working on UN issues, and I do have to give a shout out to Ambassador Elizabeth Cousins, who was instrumental in dragging me from Oxford into IPI and the universe of the UN. Second, I'm also delighted to represent academia, which has become a crucial partner to the UN and its agencies, especially in these very challenging times. The newly launched UN initiative at the Center for Global Affairs at NYU serves the UN in three distinct ways, even though we're the youngest of the partners here. We're only 15 years old. First, it prepares the next generation of global leaders and citizens for a career in the UN universe. Additionally, it also provides tailor-made training to those working in and with the UN. Second, colleagues at CGA also conduct problem-solving research related to the UN on a variety of topics. And I would very strongly commend the recently released publication by Jennifer Trehan on the veto. Third, practicums run by CGA faculty and students work directly with UN entities on specific projects. Indeed, CGA has contributed to the data analysis of the UN75 survey, which is part of the UN75 report. Given these credentials, we're absolutely honored to be part of this important conversation with IPI, UN75, and of course, the group of women leaders. Which, as Adam, you mentioned, is the third in the series of all-women dialogues that will serve as a curtain raiser to the high-level event on Monday, the 21st of September, and provide inputs into the final UN75 report due in January 2021. Today, as we enter a historic 75th meeting of the UN General Assembly, the timing of this event is incredibly apt and yet formidable. The very nature of a largely virtual opening of the General Assembly due to the threat of COVID-19 reminds us of this fact. Indeed, the global challenges that face our world today, such as climate change, nuclear proliferation, protracted conflicts, and a worldwide pandemic, require effective international cooperation in order to combat their consequences. And yet, multilateralism itself seems to be under threat, with the legitimacy, efficacy, and even the necessity of its institutions being brought into question. In fact, even before the COVID-19 onslaught, the role of the UN as an arena, agent, and actor was stymied. It has become a cliche to say that multilateralism in general and the UN in particular is at a declension point. But what are our options? There are three possible scenarios for the UN's future. First, the continued relevance of the UN as the center of the multilateral universe. However, this might be possible only if the UN is able to leverage the ongoing disruption, engage a host of sub-state and non-state actors, devise innovative negotiation approaches, and address emerging challenges to recover better. Second, if the UN is unable to manage this transformation and discontinuity and continues business as usual, it might be relegated to the sidelines and become just one of the multiplicity of forums to deal with 21st century challenges. Third, and perhaps the most somber scenario of a UN unable or unwilling to recover better might well be its growing irrelevance or even demise. While a world without the UN will be a far worse one than even with a dysfunctional UN, this eventuality needs to be considered. None of these outcomes is inevitable, and each one of them will require concerted collective action from the individual to the global level, especially if we want to preserve and strengthen the UN over the next 25 years. So how can we ensure the solidarity and sustained collective action for the outcome we want? Can the UN be the arena, agent, and actor that we need in order to build the future we want? To answer this question, I'm delighted to turn to our fantastic moderator, Jimena Leiva, a senior fellow and head of the Peace and Sustainable Program at IPI, to introduce our stellar panel and conduct the discussion. Thank you, and over to you, Jimena.
Thank you, Sidhu, and thank you for the fantastic, we certainly have a stellar panel for sure. Thank you for the kind words and also for the clarity of the options. You gave us a range of options from the UN continuing being a central relevant actor to potential irrelevance. And I hopefully this panel that we will hear now will help us elucidate how can the UN continue being a relevant organization, a universal place where we the peoples and we the member states coexist in an inclusive manner. And you also mentioned a time frame. Yeah, we're celebrating the UN at 75, but you gave us 25 years. In 25 years, we'll be at UN 100. So we step back and we think, oh wow, when we are celebrating UN 100, what are we going to say about this period of COVID? It has really been a turning point for humanity. And the way we act now will define how are we going to be seeing this moment when we are 100, when we are celebrating the 100 years of the UN. So as mentioned, and thank you, Adam, also for the wonderful welcoming remarks and for joining us. We have a wonderful panel. The bios of our panelists are on the website, so I'm not going to do a big introduction, but I do want to warmly welcome Ambassador Maria Fernanda Espinosa, diplomat from Ecuador. You know her also from her role as former PGA. Welcome. We would also like to welcome Ambassador Cousins, who was an ambassador here in New York, and we battled the SDGs together. And now she's the president and CEO of the UN Foundation. With us, we also have from Sudan, Nisreen El Saim. Nisreen, thank you so much for joining us. She is the chair of the SG's advisory group on climate change. And last but not least, Natalie Samarasinghe, who is our wonderful strategist on UN75. So welcome. The first question that we want to ask you, and you'll have a minute to reply, is what has been the biggest insight that you've come out of this like months where the world really turned upside down from all of us? What has been the main aha moment that that this period has brought to you? So first of all, Ambassador Espinosa, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you, Jimena, and thank you to all this incredible alliance of people organizing this dialogue. The International Peace Institute, of course, the UN75 office, and my dear friend and colleague Natalie, the group of women leaders that I am a proud member of, and the Center for Global Affairs of NYU. I think that the discussion today is so important and relevant. How to build the future of the UN, how to creatively rethink the multilateral system. And going to your question in a 1 minute response, perhaps I think that one of the most impactful moments since the pandemic started was when the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, stated in tears, and he was literally crying when he said that worse than the COVID pandemic was, and I pretty much quote him, the lack of leadership and solidarity, and that we cannot defeat this pandemic as a divided world. And the COVID-19, he said, is a test for global solidarity and global leadership. And I think that Dr. Tedros cannot be more right. It is about increasing cooperation, concerted action, and international solidarity. And that's also part of the conversation that gathers us today. So that was my 1 minute.
Thank you. That's very, very deep. And thank you so much for opening with those words. Next, Nisreen, would you like to speak next?
Yes, sure. I'm very happy to be here today. I think the worst and hardest moment within the COVID-19 was getting detached from the people. Because as a young person and as a climate advocate, most of our work, not only within the UN processes, not only in the UN corridors, but also with the people. We used to work with a huge crowd of young people around Sudan and around Africa also regarding climate change. And because of the coronavirus, we got a lot detached from each other. And I think good internet connection to have Zooms and webinars is a privilege that a lot of people doesn't actually acknowledge. But unfortunately, a lot of areas that we are working on doesn't have access to electricity, not even not saying the internet, but not even having access to electricity. So I think the worst and hardest moment was not seeing the people we are working with, not seeing them, not being able to visit the trees that we are actually planting and taking care of for a long time, for more than 6 or 7 months. And I think the worst part was going to, I have a small garden, but it's very far away because I travel a lot. So I decided to establish my small forest. So every time I travel, I plant a tree for my trip. So when I went back after the coronavirus lockdown, I found half of the plants were actually dead because no one had the opportunity to actually irrigate them. So I think I was shocked by the picture in general with the dead planets, and I can only imagine how is the situation now in the Amazonia, in the different California forests with the fires, because I think seeing green things is always bringing joyful to the people and our hearts.
Thank you, Nisreen. That's also very, very important. The isolation that this period has brought, and the fact that this, while Zoom and the technologies have brought sort of a universal platform, it has also excluded many that don't have access to this. And it is a privilege. And thank you for reminding us of that. Elizabeth?
Well, thank you, Jimena, and I'm delighted to join you all. It's an honor to join this panel, and it feels very much like a homecoming, as I am also an alumna of IPI. Well, it's no secret that our beloved 75-year-old multilateral order is hobbling. On the one hand, it has stood an incredible test of time and racked up some remarkable achievements, from ending smallpox to closing the ozone hole to helping end or mitigate conflicts in so many parts of the world. But the system has also been under extreme and increasing duress, and in comes COVID-19, and it's the ultimate stress test for global cooperation. So the biggest insight for me about all of this, I guess, is twofold. I mean, first, notwithstanding all of the dynamics pulling in the opposite direction, I do think we're seeing many people recognize just how much they have to lose if we further erode our capacity for cooperation to solve global problems. Whether it's the pandemic or the climate emergency or making sure 80 million kids get their measles vaccine on time. Second, the crisis is shining a much needed light, and an overdue light, on precisely the underlying inequities and tensions that were why we created the SDGs in the first place. And all of this disruption around us, in a way, is giving us a second chance to tackle them with redoubled ambition, which we urgently must do. So that's really the second part, I guess, for me, is the recognition and internalizing deeply how much the SDGs need to be at the center of our recovery efforts. Thank you.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much. And you bring like the origins of the UN, the thing about, like, we have a lot more to lose if we divide ourselves, right? The UN was really founded on the idea that many small countries stand the much to lose if we don't have a coalesced body that protects us all. So from the founding to the 75th year, that continues to be very relevant for multilateralism. And of course, the SDGs being hopefully now the blueprint that will unite us forward. Natalie, next.
Thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure to join you and to have worked with many of you over this year, which is not just the 75th anniversary, but was also and is the start of the decade of action for the Sustainable Development Goals, which is something we need to really remind ourselves of. I think the key takeaway for me has been that, huge transformations are possible. Changes on a scale that nobody would have thought could happen, have happened in a very short space of time, because we've had political will aligned with public support and backed by evidence. And we've seen it happen at a pace that would have been unthinkable. Even the UN has managed to go virtual. Never thought we'd see that. But I think the point is, if the world can do it for this crisis, we can do it for climate change. And we can do it in a way that works for everyone, to Nisreen's point, in a way that provides access to services, to energy, education, water, technology. this was the #1 message to emerge from the UN75 consultation this year. And I really hope that the discussions next week and the adoption of the political declaration on the 75th anniversary will move us closer to that point.
Great, thank you. And we look forward to hearing more about the consultations and about the key messages that this massive survey that you've done has revealed in the next few questions. So to all our audience, thank you so much for joining us. In the next few minutes, while I start asking questions to our fabulous speakers, if you have a question, please type it out in the Q&A box or also send it through our social media channels. And even if we don't get to answer all of the questions during the Q&A moment, we will definitely send all the questions and comments to Natalie's team so that it can also be featured as part of the feedback for the report. So please do engage with us through the Q&A. And with me, I have a friend, the polar bear, who keeps me, helps me keep track of time. So after the 3 minutes are over, I'm just going to raise the bear, and that's a subtle sign for you that your time is up. So it's not me, the culprit or the bad cop, is the bear. Okay, great. So Ambassador Espinosa, during your term as PGA, you focused on inequality as one of the main themes. With the pandemic, entire regions that were making progress on eradicating poverty and narrowing inequality have been set back for years, if not decades, in a matter of months. What can be done to halt this reversal and keep the gains made? Thank you.
Well, that's a huge question. I think that, you know, in spite of the catastrophic multidimensional impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think it has also allowed enormous creativity, a myriad of proposals, innovative ideas. And we pretty much know what to do and even how to do it sometimes. And yet the weak part of the equation seems to be leadership and concerted action. And here I want to echo Dr. Tedros as well in a follow-up of the previous question. You know, in other words, who is going to carry this out? And that has to be, you know, to do with three perhaps, you know, high on the priority scale, on the climate crisis, on the gender gap and inequalities, but also in general on inequalities. I think leadership is sorely needed, but you know, when we speak about leadership, it has to come from the whole of society. It is not only governments or messianic leaders, but you know, social activists, women, journalists, opinion makers, scientists, academia, indigenous leaders. You know, I think that we all have a role to play in building this new social contract that we have the opportunity now to build. And in this new social contract has to be between society, the economy, politics, and nature as well. So I think that we have to keep in mind that the multilateral system is not a self-operating machinery. It does not have self-agency. You know, the multilateral system at the UN is what we want it to be. It's us that, you know, we have the responsibility to craft the system to serve us and the interest of with the peoples, you know, to repeat that. And you know, going back to your question, the issue of inequalities, I think has been magnified because of COVID. And I think one of the main challenges and tasks is to close the inequalities gap. And inequalities are multidimensional, can be found in every single sustainable development goal. And we do need partnerships, alliances, but above all, I think strong leadership. And this shared leadership and shared co-responsibility. And this has been part of this incredible global conversation on the UN75 process, on the survey that perhaps we will hear more from Natalie. You know, if you look at the outcomes of this survey, I don't want to steal the ideas, but it's really, you know, breathtaking to see that 6 out of 10 people worldwide, they think that the UN has made the world a better place. But here again, we find ourselves confronting real politics and a communication deficit that we need to overcome. You showed the polar bear, so it means that I'll have the opportunity perhaps to pick up on these ideas further in our conversation. So thank you, Jimena, back to you.
Thank you so much. And definitely, this is meant to be a conversation. So we will definitely want to hear more about this. And the deficit in communication and the crisis of leadership that you touched upon are key things that we have to address. And this panel is meant to also discuss priority and solutions. So we want to hear some solutions from you in how we can address this double deficit that you just described. Next, Ambassador Cousins, we had the pleasure of working together on creating the Sustainable Development Goals. And when you were ambassador to the US here in the UN, little did we know that the world would turn upside down at the beginning of the last decade of action of implementation for the SDGs. How can we localize the SDGs amid rising populism and nationalism that run against the spirit of this universal agenda?
Well, thanks, Jimena. And first of all, I'm not sure your bear is all that subtle, but I know we need to listen to it. And we did indeed have a remarkable experience negotiating the SDGs together. And I'm always grateful to you for your leadership at that time. Look, the headwinds are incredibly fierce. There is so much anger and distrust and politics that are deepening rather than overcoming our divisions. But I actually see incredible bright spots, especially at the local level. And I want to just give people a few examples from right here in the United States. So just give you a few. New York City started a movement in 2018 when it presented the first ever voluntary local review on the SDGs to encourage cities to race to the top on SDG achievement. And there are now well over 100 cities who have joined this cause and are doing those reviews. This week, the UN Foundation and Brookings hosted what I hope will become an annual event. We started it last year, had the second this year, to showcase local American innovation and leadership on the SDGs. And it included Hawaii, the state of Hawaii, releasing its first ever state review on its progress toward the SDGs. A university like Carnegie Mellon launching the first ever voluntary university review. Los Angeles announcing a new SDG tracker tool that allows all the variety of community organizations in Los Angeles to directly connect the SDGs to their real lives and impact. And we heard how the mayor of Los Angeles is using his leadership as chair of the C40 Coalition of Cities on Climate to convene city leaders around equitable response to COVID and recovery. We heard from companies. Walmart, who is the biggest employer in the United States, that was news to me, is now transforming its supply chains, tackling equity, climate change, and gender issues. So that's just a few snippets from this country. There is obviously incredible leadership and bright spots around the world in cities and communities elsewhere. So I look to a lot of those sources of leadership and innovation where we have real reserves of political power in other places. And the key to me is to connect them, to empower them, and to find new ways of bringing that leadership into the debates and platforms and actions that we have at the global level.
Great. Thank you so much for bringing these concrete examples of bright spots. And I agree with you. How can we make these bright spots bigger and bigger so that they eventually can really be the main narrative that we're listening to and can silence a little bit of that hatred and that polarization that you addressed at the beginning. So thank you so much for bringing that positive message as well to the conversation. Next, Nisreen El Saim. You're the chair of the newly formed SG's Global Advisory Group on Climate Action. You have worked with many youth groups regionally and internationally. What are the demands of young people under these circumstances and how can they be achieved? Nisreen, are you with us? While Nisreen reconnects, we will shift to Natalie, and then we'll come back to Nisreen. Natalie, you've worked both as an insider and outsider of the UN. Can you tell us more about the key messages that have emerged from the UN75 campaign, and what surprised you the most?
Well, I think actually the first thing that surprised me, and this was before I joined the UN75 team, was that the UN wasn't going to mark the 75th anniversary in the usual way. You know, nice event, concert, campaign highlighting the ways the UN makes a difference. I mean, that's very, very important. But the Secretary General was clear that he wanted us to use this occasion to listen to people. So we set about trying to ask as many people as possible to share their hopes and fears for the future, the expectations of us, the UN, and of global cooperation, and crucially also ideas on how to address the challenges we face. So what we try to do through surveys, media research, AI research, and dialogues is really, I think, the most ambitious effort by the UN to crowdsource priorities and solutions. And I thought the priorities would be very similar to my world, maybe a bit more emphasis on climate, a bit more emphasis on inequalities. Then COVID happened, and I didn't even think people would want to take part. But that's actually when we saw the initiative take off. And I don't think that's just because people were sort of bored during lockdown, or, you know, it was, I think because people saw this was a global crisis with far-reaching consequences that could not be solved by the government acting in isolation, that probably would require, you know, intensive efforts over many years, that no country, no matter how big or powerful, was going to be spared, that all people were affected, but of course not everyone equally. And I think the results that have emerged reflect that. Huge support for a global cooperation, over 87% globally, and not just UN supporters. We did representative polling in 50 countries as well. We found that even the UN's strongest supporters wanted to be different, better, more effective, more inclusive, more open, more accountable. People want to address the immediate impacts of COVID. I mentioned access to services, but they're also thinking long-term. What the impact going to be on inequalities long-term, unemployment? How can we get more support to the hardest hit? I think that's a powerful message of solidarity to take back to world leaders. Beyond COVID, climate is the #1 concern. And in terms of solutions, people are thinking big. They want us to rethink the global economy, take bold action on climate, and they want a meaningful say and representation in the decisions that affect their lives at the global level, as well as the national and local levels. So that's really the message we want to take to world leaders next week. Maria Fernanda mentioned the report. You've already given us some great ideas. Just for the benefit of people listening in, it will be out publicly for everyone to read at 9 a.m. New York time on Monday.
Great, excellent. We can't wait to really read the report, and thank you for giving us kind of a sneak preview of what some of the main results are. And it is really great to hear that climate is at the top of the priorities, and how and there's so many reports saying right now that we have a once in a generation opportunity, that if all stimulus are carbon neutral, we can really turn the corner on climate and avoid the next pandemic. So we have to really use this opportunity, despite that COP26 has been postponed, to rally up support towards a carbon neutral world in this time of COVID. So thank you so much for this. I will then ask you a final question before we open up for Q&A. And of course, I will wait for Nisreen to join us back to ask her more of her work. In the meantime, since we are in a very unique panel with stellar female leaders, I want to ask each of you, what does it mean to be a feminist leader in today's world? What do you feel you have done differently because of your deep belief in gender equality and empowerment? Who would like to speak first? Maria Fernanda? You're muted.
Me. Okay. Well, I think that one of the greatest challenges perhaps that we face is that as a politician here, you know, political cycles are very short. Presidency of the General Assembly is 1 year. You're appointed foreign minister or minister of defense, and you know that your days are counted. So you have to be fast and quick, just to make sure that you leave a footprint on what changes you can make, and just to be very practical. My first day, I made sure that the composition of my cabinet as president of the General Assembly was 60-50, of course 60% women and 50% men. Every panel, high-level event, facilitators for negotiations, everything, with gender parity, and sometimes women only. A group of women leaders as permanent advisors and observers of the work of the presidency, called, the Women in Power initiative, just to make sure that we were doing things right in an everyday, very intense agenda. Coaching and inspiration for younger leaders. Gender equality and non-discrimination policy for the armed forces in my country when I was the Minister of Defense, affirmative action and gender policy for the Ecuadorian Foreign Service to make sure that female diplomats were treated fairly, etc., etc. So I think that when we are given the opportunity, we have to rush and run, especially because, we had to fight hard to be in the decision-making positions that we are now. And I think we need to continue struggling, fighting. It is our duty, it is our responsibility. And, that has been my personal story, but I am absolutely convinced that women in power really have a transformative agency, and that we are needed. Any response, recovery plan for COVID, any Build Back Better initiative has to have us, front and center. That's how, what is going to make, a true difference. The multilateral system has to be a feminist, rejuvenated multilateral system. And I'm absolutely convinced that it's the only way, to rejuvenate, retool, improve the multilateral system. We are asked all the time, delivery deficit. I mean, we need to deliver better. We need to be more transparent. We need to be more accountable. That's why, watching and the survey process, Natalie, I think it needs to be a built-in mechanism, permanent built-in mechanism for the UN. Listening to what people are saying in a daily basis, and correct the mistakes and redirect the work we are doing with the peoples. Yesterday I said we need multilateralism innovation lab that works on a permanent basis, as a built-in mechanism to listen to the people in a permanent daily basis, a daily thermometer for the performance of the multilateral system and the UN. And perhaps that would lead us to the first scenario that Professor Paul Sidhu was mentioning at the beginning. The first optimum scenario depends very much on our capacity of listening, of acting, and of having more women in power, more women in decision-making positions, especially young women.
Excellent. Thank you.
You didn't
so
show
much.
your polar bear. But
I was like about, but you were like so passionately speaking. I couldn't bear to bring the polar bear out. And obviously, one feminist leader in power, being a male or female, can really bring transformative change, as you mentioned. Natalie, do you want to respond to what the ambassador just mentioned, and also give us your take on feminist leadership?
I'm sure. I mean, first to say, I think that's absolutely something we hope will be a legacy from this initiative. The fact that the UN listens on an ongoing basis, that there are ongoing ways, not just to get people's ideas and thoughts, but also their feedback, their involvement in monitoring, really building on, the SDGs processes, locally, I think will be hugely important, the Universal Periodic Review of the Human Rights Council. So I really hope that's something we can take forward. On feminist leadership, I mean, it's hard. I think that's what I want to say. I mean, to be honest, that's what it feels like. You end up asking the same questions a lot. Why are we doing things like this? What's the impact going to be on women, on people with disabilities? Why don't we have more diverse voices? You end up pushing for the same things over and over again, often with the same people. I'm sure most, if not every woman on this panel will have been the only woman on the panel at some point, and you wonder, is that the reason I'm there? And then you still do it because your voice matters and at least someone will hear you. So I think what I've tried to do is just try and, be a bit different in style. I've tried to be honest. I think there's a temptation for women to pretend that, you're superwoman, you're always on top of everything, you work twice as hard. It's not sustainable. I think we need to break that cycle, admit that we're human. Everyone has probably seen my kid at some point, doing this home working on screen. I take time off when I'm sick. I cry when we work on challenging issues, we all do. I admit I don't know things. I think these are not things that are traditionally associated with, strong leaders, but I think we need to be honest. Always try to treat people as humans, not workers. I'm on sabbatical from an NGO called UNA UK, and even before COVID, we were really, into creating flexibility, work-life balance, focusing on outcomes, not how many hours you're in the office. And that's benefited everyone, not just those with caring responsibilities. Everyone benefits from that kind of environment. And I use the platform. I talk about being a woman, I talk about being a minority, a migrant, people from my family are refugees. I'm sure a lot of people don't like it or get very bored, but I think until there are more people who look like me in positions of power, I'm not going to shut up.
That's great. And that's very heartwarming. And also thank you for bringing the motherhood aspect into the conversation, which is such a relevant side of this and in COVID times, right? How it's affected the work and responsibilities at the house. And it's also great that you mentioned that none of us have to be superwoman or superman to make a difference, but really to highlight our joint humanity. And it makes us more human to be this way and humble in a way. So thank you for that very honest answer and personal story. Elizabeth?
Well, it won't surprise you that you have violent agreement among your panelists, but on everything. But I want to pick up on Natalie's candor and say and the theme of toughness, because I think being a feminist leader or caring about feminism or caring about equality right now actually means not accepting what we've achieved to date, not accepting that it's enough, or expecting that the world is going to evolve toward equality on its own without literally all of us pushing. You've all seen the analysis that came out several months ago that it will take 99.5 years for all women to be equal in all respects everywhere. That is clearly 99.5 years too long. And plenty of people, and Jimena, you'll remember when we were negotiating the SDGs, said things like, how can you put a goal like end all forms of violence and discrimination against women? It's unrealistic. How can it be anything other than unacceptable as opposed to unrealistic? So I think part of what we need to do is to challenge some of our old arguments. So, yes, the world benefits when you educate a girl. And yes, it helps when you give women small business loans. All those incremental gains matter enormously, and we need to keep pushing for them. But we have been pushing for them for a long time, and we are clearly not changing minds, behaviors, or laws fast enough because we're still at 99.5 years. So I think being feminist today actually means that to move forward, we almost have to move back to a clearer focus on justice, the clarity of a call for justice, whether it's for women, for Black Americans, for Indigenous people, for people cut out of progress, and just determine ourselves to focus relentlessly on policy change, on legislative change, and on structural change that's needed to make that real.
Great. Thank you so much. Excellent points. Thank you. Nisreen, thank you so much for connecting back. I had asked you, what do you think are the demands of young people under these COVID circumstances, and how can these be achieved?
Well, it's very tough to speak after this power panel and after all of the amazing things I've heard from different leaders in the panel here. They actually said everything we want to see within the UN or within the globe. But I think more the demands of the young people is to actually walk the talk. We like very much to use this phrase because walking the talk will mean that we actually do what we actually say. Especially being a young person, we actually get used as a trend very much a lot. So they say like young people are the fuel for the future. They are the change maker and the change agents. But then when it comes to decision making, for example, positions, when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to actually implement things on the reality, then the people who are actually trending, the young people actually disappear. So our main demand is to walk the talk. When you say something, you should commit to it and you should actually execute it. It's very important what Ambassador Espinosa just said about accountability, about actually doing what we want to see ourselves first place, because it's very easy to point others, but it's very hard to actually point back to yourself. And I think what makes us special as young people that we actually take different suggestions, we take the informations we get, we empty our cups, we try to use different new materials in order to make our work better. And the last but not least, the most important thing is to actually be fearless and to express what you want to see very, very clear, and stop moving around and actually pointing the problem. Because if you did not actually point the problem, then you will not actually find the solution for it. For example, talking about climate change and climate crises, we all know what's happening within the climate change negotiations. We all know that there is nothing happening within the loss and damage, while we see fires, we see floods, we see hurricanes everywhere. So who's going to compensate who lost everything actually in the climate crisis? We all see that the big emitters are actually continue emitting when no one actually stopping them. We had like almost 25 years of negotiations about climate change. We had a progress. It's very important to acknowledge the good things we did and the progress we made. But I don't think we have another 25 years to actually achieve the final goals in climate change, because we are already seeing it and we are already experiencing it. So this is our very much demand, and this is how we can actually make the demands come true, by actually pointing the direct problem and saying the direct fearless solutions for that, and actually being part of this solution from the process of making the solution, the policies, the laws, the implementation of it. And it's very important for us not to be used as a trend.
Right. Thank you so much. These are a very candid assessment of needing to walk the talk, including youth in the decision-making process, and finally being fearless. So these are three things that we will take to heart, and that I think that the panelists here share that characteristic of fearlessness. So with that, it is absolutely fantastic that we have 30 minutes for a Q&A and to engage with our audience. And the first speaker that we have the pleasure to have with us today is Ambassador Mohamed Idris from PR of Egypt. Welcome. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jimena, and thank you for IPI. It's a great pleasure and honor to see Her Excellency Maria Fernanda Espinosa and to be with this very special, highly empowered panel, genderly empowered panel. It's a great honor to be with this panel. I would want to take of time not to dwell much about the COVID and what it did and what it will do and the impact. All these are well known. I just want to draw some conclusions and share some thoughts and appreciate seeking feedback and shedding light on it. One is, I think COVID did two things in opposite directions. One, it pushed our life from reality to virtuality, but it pulled the threats to our life from virtuality to reality. We were talking about climate change, about environmental degradation. We thought all that we are talking about hypothetical things, but it became virtual now. while our life is moving, it became real while our life is moving to be virtual. Second thing that I think the human inflated ego was hit hard. And it became really deflated. And I think this should drive us to move from arrogance and carelessness into more modesty and humbleness and caring about our globe and about each other. Other point is the conundrum which we are facing now between how to bypass it. We are not able to live together in harmony, but we are not able to be apart in viability. Countries neighboring each other, they are in state of conflict. They are so much politically diverse, but so much economically engaged. So they cannot be apart, but they're still against. So this polarization between political polarization at one point, and economic integration at the other. We need to reconcile this. Other point is the multilateralism, and quite frankly, I think multilateralism, we talk about its importance, but there is a big difference, multilateralism and pluralism. Some point we have some sort of pseudo-lateralism. And this, the danger of it, that we assume that this is real multilateralism, so we have response to it. We project not the right image, so we get negative response to this. People are angry, not happy, not comfort, but they are responding to this pseudo-lateralism, not the real one. So the danger that it gives sometimes popular reaction against multilateralism, which actually we needed so much. The conclude, I think we are facing also, we need a cure. In addition to need a cure to the COVID-19, which is ongoing, hopefully we'll get it soon, we need a cure to another disease, which the Secretary General called it TDS, Trust Deficiency Syndrome. So we have anemia. We need to have this treatment for this deficiency in the trust, and definitely this will get us into so many things. We need to have, in my view, we need to have, of course, leading by example. We need to have success stories, and we need to have a leadership with a vision and a sense of a mission. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us in this discussion. Would anyone like to comment on the issues brought?
I can jump in with a quick reflection. Thank you so much, Ambassador. I think the point I want to pick up, and it's something Elizabeth actually alluded to before, is about, you know, your second point. You know, we can't live together, but we have to work together. How do we overcome this conundrum? And Elizabeth alluded to this as well. It was about sort of when we look at the founding of the UN. That story we're often told is one about vision, idealism, common aspiration for the future, and that's part of it. But we shouldn't forget that the UN was a very pragmatic response. This was a response by wartime leaders who recognized that cooperation and compromise was in their national interest and much less costly than the alternative. And I think that's perhaps how we can try and approach that conundrum. We need that balance today. I mean, COVID-19 has made it clear, whether we like it or not, we are connected, we depend upon each other, we have to keep each other safe. We're only as strong as the most vulnerable among us. Today's problems just don't recognize those borders. So solidarity, working together cannot be this sort of nice fuzzy feeling or add-on. It is essential now to our survival. So I hope that that case can be made in a very nationalist way if it has to be. And I hope that the UN75 consultation, which showed across the board, all ages, all social groups, in every country, a majority of people wanting global cooperation, I hope that can help by showing that it's not just, I think there's a saying, not just populism that's popular. I think multilateralism is pretty popular too, and I hope we can make that case.
Great.
Jimena, can I jump in with just a quick footnote? So first, just to say how much I really appreciate the ambassador's comments, all of them. very much. I sometimes have taken to saying multilateralism is the new realism, very much to Natalie's point. It's not sentimental. It's not because everybody gets along. It's precisely because they don't always get along that you need multilateral institutions and understandings. I do think there is something very powerful about this notion that we're living history in a very, very real and immediate way. And, you know, you think about everything you ever learned from earlier periods and crises, or movies you've seen even, where you think, how could people not have seen that on the other side of their choices, they're about to go off a brink. They're about to shoot themselves in the foot and defeat their highest and best purposes. You know, why don't they stop, right? And I think it would behoove all of us to take a moment to stop and think about the moment we're in precisely that light. That is where we are. Every day, whether we're as voters or as leaders or as business people, people are making daily choices that are moving us up to any number of brinks. We do not have to go over them, but we have to have the self-consciousness to realize that's what's happening and start to make really intentional choices. And to, you know, Maria Fernandez and others' points, really organize across the various platforms and communities that we're in, because it would be very easy to miss this window and this moment.
Great, excellent, thank you. So maybe, oh, go ahead, yeah.
Jimena, you know, very quickly, just to have the privilege to say hello to my dear brother, Ambassador Idris, and it's great to see him virtually, of course. And just just a headline on saying that I think that the UN 75th anniversary of the UN perhaps should be remembered as a litmus test for the multilateral system, and in that test led, let's hope that you know, future generations are going to see it, but led to a refounding moment of the UN. And that refounding moment has to go beyond a technocratic reform. You know, it has to be a refounding moment with multiple voices, with co-responsibility, and to use, you know, in full speed, this traction of this global conversation that has happened this year. So it cannot, all this wealth of ideas, all this attention, involvement of young people, of the elders, you know, it cannot go to waste. So, you know, I think that now it is a time for strategy and tactics, to draw the map, to see how, you know, we go further with what we have in hand, and how to do it, and what are the alliances that we need to build to make it happen somehow. So I think that there is a need for strategy and tactics now, and I'm very happy that we're having this conversation, and that Nisrin is part of that we have a member state, and not any member state, but Egypt, you know, among us, and that is the kind of alliances and partnerships we need to redraw the map and to look at the future in a very, you know, pragmatic way, operationally, how to go further with this idea of the refounding moment for the UN and the multilateral system.
Great, excellent. I have a bunch of questions bursting in the Q&A, so maybe I'll put 3 questions and throw them out there, and then you can respond to some of these questions. The first one is, the SG noted while addressing the World Health Assembly in May, we have seen some solidarity, but very little unity in our response to COVID-19. So in your opinion, how can we increase a unified response to COVID-19 and beyond? That's the first question. The second question is, how do our panelists envision the future of the UN in a way that minimizes the challenges of an innately bureaucratic system? Third, what would be your priorities for addressing the inequalities that the pandemic has either brought to the forefront and deepened? And then there's another question about human rights and its principles, and how can we ensure that the human rights framework is part of the COVID response?
Yes, so I would like to jump in to the inequality question. like because a lot of people actually notice that they are privileged and there is a lot of inequality because of the COVID-19. So COVID-19 might made a huge loss to our loved ones, our economy, and also our health systems. But it somehow, as the Secretary General said, showed us that we can actually soliditate with the others who doesn't have the same privilege that we have. The main issue is the inequalities that we had before the COVID-19, and we will have the same inequalities after the COVID-19. So the main issue is, for example, we are saying that SDGs is about leaving no one behind. Well, I always say that a lot of people, massive population of people around the world and a lot of countries are actually feeling that they will already left behind. Now, the only difference that COVID-19 caused, that leaving no one behind, was actually was the actual thing that COVID-19 did. So it hit COVID-19 hit the most developed countries the same way that the COVID-19 hit the least developed countries. The only issue is it increased the numbers of poverty in the least developed countries, for example, because of the informal workers are more centered in the least developed countries. So I think before thinking of the inequalities that the COVID-19 caused, we should first think of the inequalities that we had before the COVID-19, and we'll say even if we find a cure for the COVID-19 and we stop talking about COVID-19, but there will still a lot of inequalities happening. When we think sustaining the development, we should also think on how to sustain the way of the solutions that we actually propose for different issues. Because mainly as young person, for example, I think that we need to actually think more about people who were actually thinking that they were left behind even before the COVID-19. People who are actually struggling to find their food for the day, and people who are actually thinking that COVID-19, the only thing that the COVID-19 did is that the poor and the rich, that all of them, all of the world can actually get a COVID-19. No one is immune to that. So I think somehow COVID-19 united the humanity, but why we can't actually have the same response to the COVID-19 in different countries is because we think economy is the most important thing. While economy was there far after the humanity was there. So the humanity was there before the economy.
Right. So humanity is before economy. I think that's a really great point to hone in, and how. Thank you so much for bringing the key principle in the 2030 agenda, which is this promise of leaving no one behind. And we are a very big turning point, and that's why, as Maria Fernanda Espinosa was saying, we need a strategy, right? We need the best minds in the member states, in the multilateral, in academia, to really put our thinking hats together and connect these bright spots that we had discussed at the beginning of the conversation, and make a really stop the reversal that we're seeing and the increase in inequality. So thank you so much. Who would like to go next? Maria Fernanda? Go ahead.
Oh, again, okay. Well, I was trying to shift the order a little bit, but you know, it's it's what Nisrin has said is so true. You know, we hear, you know, time and again saying, well, COVID is touching, you know, every country, every region, every community, which is true. But the effects of COVID in poor, disenfranchised communities, in persons with disabilities, in refugees, you know, it's really, it hurts your heart, because, you know, access to health services, but, you know, unemployment, difficulties in bringing food to their families. We just saw this report from FAO saying that by the end of the year, we will have 160 million more people, hungry people, before the end of the year. So, you know, yes, you know, a pandemic affects us all, but affects in a different way the poor, the vulnerable, the disenfranchised. So our commitment of leaving no one behind is going to be even, you know, further from our reach. We shouldn't forget, you know, we have this roadmap, we have this survival kit, which are the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. And, you know, I've heard, you know, we need to rethink about the goals, about the indicators. I also agree on the idea that we need to rethink and reassess, but to be more ambitious and not to water down our previous agreements. We need to be more ambitious. Same goes for our climate commitments. We already know, I mean, it's pure arithmetics. Even if we achieve all the commitments under the Paris Agreement, it's not going to be good enough. And we already know that. So there is a lot that we need to do. And we have seen, I spoke about refugees and persons with disabilities and migrants. And it is obvious that they're suffering more. Women are losing more jobs than men, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, the pandemic has, you know, brought to a magnifier glass inequalities. And at the same time, we see these fortunes multiplying, you know, using even, you know, the stress, the uncertainty, and the needs under a pandemic. And we see what's happening with Mr. Bezos and others that are multiplying their fortunes when people are losing their food and their livelihoods as we speak. So there, in that, you know, it's politics. I mean, it is politicians having to take the responsibility and reconnecting the scales. I think Elizabeth mentioned, you know, these golden good practices at the local level, at the city level, New York, etc. But we need to connect the scales. You know, success stories at the local level, at the city level, they have to scale up and back, you know, big normative policy efforts, they have to just touch the ground and the local level and improve people's lives. So, you know, as a geographer, I can say the issue of reconnecting the scales is part of the task ahead.
Right. Thank you. Are there any?
I'll jump in if you want other comments. No, so first, Jimena, can we agree here that we will block any effort to renegotiate the Sustainable Development Goals? That we can take them as a floor, not a ceiling, right? We can raise the level of ambition. We can do all kinds of things with them, but please God, let's not reopen them. That's just one comment. But just so first on the equity point, I think there could be no more pointed emblem of this than this week's call from David Beasley, asking the world's billionaires to rally to try to save 30 million people from dying of hunger this year. I mean, that was an extraordinary moment, I think, that really should give all of us quite a lot of pause, an opportunity to save the planet and save people. I just wanted to pick up on this theme of solidarity and unity, though. I think that you mentioned the SG referring to at the World Health Assembly. I mean, first, just to reinforce, we have seen remarkable displays of solidarity already across this crisis. And it's just important to remember that. And some of it's about the things I mentioned at the city level. Some of it's just about ordinary people, the people who are showing up to pick our food, to deliver our food, to man the basic or you know, work the basic systems that are considered essential services, often at extraordinary risk to their own lives and the lives of their families. We've seen people step up with generosity. I mean, I think some of you know, one of the pieces of work we've been the most involved in is creating a solidarity fund to support the World Health Organization. We've had almost 600,000 people around the world contribute to that. It's the single largest donor to the World Health Organization. That's incredible. And it's people giving very little just because they can and they feel like they want to find a way to help. So all that's really important and crucial. And we've seen unity sometimes too, but obviously the unity we're not seeing is the unity at the political leadership level. And, you know, I think that's where we all know that we're struggling. We are struggling to cultivate trust and confidence, and we desperately need leaders at that level, because at a certain point, that's absolutely essential to be able to survive COVID and get us past this crisis, but obviously tackle all the others that we face. I would just say this is on all of us, right? Our political leaders respond to signals. Now, some of us, if people are really unfortunate enough to live in deeply repressive societies where they don't have an ability to send those signals, that's one thing. But many of us live in contexts where we can. And we have got to get to a point where we are rewarding our political leaders at the ballot box and in every other possible way with the value that we place on solidarity and the value that we place on compassion, and the fact that we see our best futures at the other end of a cooperative effort, not something that's more divisive. So I just, you know, again, think that is one of the most important charges for all of us. And almost everybody has some degree of power to influence that outcome.
Excellent.
Maybe come in with just two very quick points to address the human rights angle, building on what Elizabeth just said, and the UN question. I think human rights, you know, much like Ms. Reen's point on inequalities, they were under attack before the pandemic. You see that sort of backsliding in many countries, the world, including maybe countries where you wouldn't expect it. You know, international laws, norms being ignored or eroded, civil society under attack. And the pandemic has been used in some cases as an excuse to deepen those attacks. You know, it's sort of the crisis mode reaction. But what gives me hope, and this builds on Elizabeth's point, is the power of people. I found it quite striking that the Secretary General actually spoke of popular discontent as one of the, you know, major risks facing the world today. And of course, if you're talking about, you know, violent unrest, you know, I totally see that point. But I think the flip side of that is the power of people raising their voices. And I think that is, you know, in a really gloomy year, that is something that has given me a lot of hope, despite it all. And a quick point about, you know, the UN question. I think we often focus about structures, composition of, you know, certain parts of the UN. That's right. That's hard. And I think even the most perfect system, the most perfect design won't make up for politics. So I think the two things that we can focus on are our leadership, good leadership at all levels, you know, senior, but mid-level too, getting good people into the system, transparent appointment processes, and also inclusion, building on Ms. Reen's point, not just paying lip service to including other voices, but actually doing it. Meaningful, ongoing inclusion, embedding people or other stakeholders into the system. I think that will hopefully help to deliver more evolutionary change and ongoing change and renewal, perhaps more than another sort of static redesign of the system could.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much. I will ask a few more questions, and this will be probably the last round of comments. So the first question is, I want to know if there is greater consciousness in the overall multilateral system towards a feminist and climate sensitive recovery plan to address COVID-19. And secondly, are there any concrete steps being taken in this direction? Second question, on leadership, what do you see as are areas that the current SG could address in bringing together member states that are disrupting multilateralism and international cooperation? And third, on the media, how much of the solutions, ideas, and aspirations generated by the global conversation on the UN75 campaign made their way to traditional media and social media? So three questions, one on the consciousness of the multilateral system towards a climate sensitive and feminist recovery plan. Second question on the SG's leadership in bringing together member states. And third question on communications.
It's very important to mention that the Secretary General has actually made climate strategy, and it's very much sensitive to gender, as you mentioned, and it's also sensitive to climate change and the green recovery after the COVID-19. But going back to what we were discussing, the whole panel, so Elizabeth was a little bit afraid of renegotiating the SDGs, but my concern is not renegotiating goals. My concern is how to achieve goals. For example, we had the MDGs before, and then when the MDGs didn't happen, actually, we did not, as a world, we did not make a huge progress on that. We thought that maybe by putting more clear goals with targets, then we might reach it fast. And then now we have the SDGs, and we have more than 10 years of the SDGs, or sorry, 5 years of the SDGs, and nothing is happening. So we still have 10 years to see, but I don't I don't want to be like unoptimistic. It's just the reality is speaking. So I'm coming from Sudan. My country actually had 40 years of civil war. We have more than 5 million kids out of school right now. We have the highest percentage of malnutrition. We have more than 30% of the new generation stunted, not only in the height, but also in mind. So when we have only 30% of access to electricity, New York City only consumes 3 times as Sudan's energy in a month for Sudan's energy in a year. So I really question, what do we mean by leaving no one behind, and the core values of the SDGs as goals, while not actually talking about how to achieve the goals that we are setting. So the Secretary General Climate Strategy, the different Paris Agreements and different agreements and protocols, different goals that the UN set. For example, the Agenda 2030 for the young people that was launched by the Secretary General and the Youth Envoy Office. So how many countries that have actually youth delegates to the UN? How many countries does actually have the capabilities and the abilities to actually use the Agenda 2030 in their national planning system, and how many countries have the financing to actually implement this agenda or to reach these goals? I think we should, before thinking about the goals, we should think how to achieve the goals meaningfully. And it doesn't always a bad thing to lower our expectation while we move forward with the people. For me, if I had 10 students, for example, and I give them a very hard test and then no one passed it, it's better for me to give them more education and less testing, so I can get more percentage of educated people and more people pass the test. So are we actually for achieving the goals, or are we actually for like all of us together achieving the goal? We have a very good quote that I like to quote a lot. If you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together. So if we did not walk far together, we will not reach that far of the SDGs. I think this will answer most of the discussions that we had earlier. I think it's very important to talk about the ways of and the plans and actions that we take to achieve goals, more than talking about the goals that we want to achieve.
Thank you, Nisreen. Elizabeth?
I'm so glad you went first. I'm just tempted to say I yield my time and agree with everything that you just said. I was just going to say in response to the question that I think you actually do see quite a lot of sensitivity to issues of equity generally, not just gender equity, climate certainly, and sustainability in the multilateral arena, including in some of the ways that Nisreen was just talking about. What we really need to see it, though, is in countries' stimulus packages and in their recovery plans, particularly among the world's biggest economies. When you think about the trillions of dollars that are going to be plowing themselves into the global economy to recover over the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months, particularly around climate. And although there has been some good movement in that direction, there is probably more investment going backwards than investment in the future of our economies and our citizens. So I think that's something, those decisions are all still open and live in so many capitals. And so really important, I think, for people to use their voice and their various sources of influence to try to encourage countries to think about the long-term future of their citizens and communities and the world at large when they think about those investments in the course of recovery.
Great.
I'm going to jump in there because I think my former boss should give us the final word. She's always, so inspirational to listen to. I just wanted to say, building again on Nisreen's point and on Elizabeth's, that we do see that if you look at the Secretary General's COVID recovery plans, in response, it is anchored in in inequality, in climate action, in what we call feminist solutions. So I think it's there. The problem is as Nisreen said, implementation. And that's the comment I want to make on the media, because I think it's really hard for the UN to cut through. If you look at, coverage of UN75, it's minimal. I mean, coverage of the most issues is minimal in the traditional media. We do a lot better on social. Conflict and violence, we surveyed media over 12 months in 70 countries across print, online, broadcasts, and social. And conflict and violence was by far the top issue covered. The next one down, about half the coverage was technology. And then you go, drop another third and you get to health, drop another third and you get to climate. And what's fascinating is the mentions of the UN within that coverage is about 2%, 3%. More for health, of course, because of COVID. So I think it's challenging. And I think what happens as a result of that is you want to show success. So you talk about success, you talk about we set these goals, this has been achieved, etc. You don't hear the narrative of we might not make it, or this is what we need to do, and we need to change things, turn around, etc. So I think it's a huge challenge, and there's not an easy answer to that. I mean, colleagues of mine obsess about this all the time, but I think it is something that, again, media is one thing. I think also just reaching people directly, peer-to-peer conversations. More people will trust their neighbor, their friend, their hairdresser, their teacher, the person on the street than the media. So I think it's important that we and those of us who care about these issues talk about them and about the solutions. But it's been a real challenge for us, and one that I think again should be a lesson learned from this year on how do we really change that conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Natalie. Ambassador Espinosa?
Well, it's very hard to add something new here. So much wisdom, and I fully agree with what has been said. But perhaps our opportunity is to own this cliche phrase of building back better. Everybody's speaking about building back better. And I think that we need to go through a narrative exercise. What do we mean by building back better? And we cannot go back to normal, because normal was the problem, at the first place. That the normality we had was really not, what we want. Inequality is not normal. The climate crisis is not normal. Racism, conflict, they're not normal. So this opportunity of owning and taking the phrase building back better to agree on a checklist, on a menu of options, and that has to include the billions, the trillions on the economic recovery packages. Elizabeth was saying that, and it is extremely important. Are these recovery plans accountable? Is there public accountability to make sure that we really mean it? Green recovery, green jobs, fighting inequalities, fighting poverty, ensuring food security for all. I mean, bringing again our survival kit, our 2030 agenda again, and saying, are we really being, coherent and honoring our commitments? What do we mean by building back better from a feminist perspective, a climate, environment sensitive, building back better? And I think that's a task ahead. The second issue perhaps that I wanted, the question was about leadership and the convening power of the UN. We waited 5 or 6 months to see a resolution from the Security Council on COVID. We wrote letters, the group of women leaders, we gathered, organized, and put a little bit of pressure. Ambassador Idris perhaps can tell us, the corridors and the negotiations and what happened. And there hasn't been a COVID heads of state summit because of the emergency in all these months. It is happening finally in November, I think, Brother Mohammed, but it's happening. We are going to have a COVID summit in November called by the new president of the General Assembly. I think the UN has to exercise in full its convening power. And it has to happen. But you know, the pressure and the commitment, you know, it has to come from member states, but also from public opinion. And here, perhaps to close with the communication deficit and the role of mainstream media and all of that. It is true, you know, what Natalie shared with us is true. We were very nervous, you know, when Natalie and I worked together, you know, at the office of the president. I mean, why is that, you know, the media are not interested in UN stuff, except when there's scandals and, you know, and I think that change is going to be incremental, but we have to make full use of alternative communication channels and other forms of media and communication. And for that, I think that we need to do a collective effort of using less acronyms and more synonyms, and really building narratives and communicating in a way that resounds on the daily life of people. And you know, there's a lot of expectations to hear, you know, the launching of the survey on Monday, but I'm pretty sure, you know, as a politician, of course, and as a foreign minister, we did these focus groups, and I keep sharing this story because it's true. We showed to people, you know, regular citizens, the flag of the UN, and people tend to smile. They like the UN. You know, they like the UN and the work of the UN. But once you ask them, I mean, can you list some of the things that the UN does for you? And there is silence. Silence. I mean, there is no connection with people's daily lives and the work of the UN. So there is, you know, a better narrative that needs to be built to better connect, to bring the UN closer to the people that it serves, you know, and that's an exercise that has to be made. And when the demand side, when people ask, you know, the mainstream media, we want to know more about what the UN is doing here and there, you know, and I think it has to be incremental progress, but it has to be also a bottom-up approach to communication and to, you know, improve our narrative and to connect better with people's lives. And I would just close with that.
Great, thank you so much. And we are about to wrap up, but I feel that this event, I feel incredibly empowered. I don't know about you, but I feel like we have the power to really like build a movement here. After hearing all of you speak. And I do want to challenge you to ask you, how can we put more pressure on our leaders for these stimulus packages to be green, to be a win-win for people and planet? Certainly the November summit could be that moment in which perhaps youth around the world are demanding for these green stimulus packages. In industrialized nations and in developing countries, we have a bit more than a month to organize and to like really increase the drum roll, because perhaps this is the pressure that's needed for leaders to act, as Elizabeth put it, in countries that we have the voice to act. We really, it's a time to exercise our vocal cords and create this wave, and in support of the findings of the UN75 report. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for the insights, and stay tuned for more.